We are often encouraged to share our faith with others, to invite folks, to touch folks for Jesus, and I'm all for it. The problem I find is often we don't know how to do that. Many of us have been through the years, you learn the Campus Crusades 4 spiritual laws, just as there are physical laws that govern our physical universe, there are spiritual laws that govern our relationship with God. Good stuff. We need to know that. We need to be able to use it. Evangelism explosion stuff. Romans Road. Some of your own good verses. You need to know a good gospel presentation. But how do you get going with that? You're talking with somebody about baseball or football, and then you say, do you know Jesus? And you're kind of going, where did that come from? How do we take a conversation and turn it or use it so that we can talk about spiritual things in a normal, appropriate way? That's what we're going to talk about today. A lot that I'm going to talk about, we're going to hit the ground running, we're going to cover some ground. This is sort of an overview of a whole semester training that I've done in the past. But it will give you enough to think and to move from where you are now. Let's look at the first verse, Colossians 4, verse 5. Michael will be very kind to me and put them on the overhead so we can follow up there. We'll look at 2 or 3 verses for the day's out. Where it says in the Colossians passage, it says, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to respond to each person. Notice it's each person. We're focused on people one at a time, each person. It's interesting, the Hebrews, the word wisdom in Hebrew, that always conjured in their mind skill. When the people built the temple, they had wisdom. In other words, they had skill with their hands so that they could craft the wood and craft the stone and craft the gold and silver. How that turns for us, when we think about wisdom, it's really skill in living. That's what we normally mean by wisdom. And in this case, it's a wisdom, it's a skill at touching that other person. How do we do that? How do we get that wisdom? How do we learn to think that way? We're going to give you some tools to do that today. The way we do it is we need to learn how God has made each man, me and you. There are 3 hints in the scriptures that we're going to look at. The first one is out of 1 Corinthians 10:13. A lot of times when we read this verse, we run right on to the second half that's not on the screen, where it says, no temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. And where it says, and God has provided us a way of escape. Sometimes we focus on that, but right now I want us to just think about what this says. No temptation has overtaken you that's not common to man. What this tells me, if I can take a hard look at my heart, if I can see what's going on in my heart, the good stuff and the not so good stuff, that your heart will may be different, not exactly the same, but it's very similar. So if I'm able to get the fog out of the way and see what's going on in my heart, I've got a hunch of what's going on in yours. On one level, for most of us Christians, that's a scary thing. Most of us don't want to see what's going on in our heart because we don't know what in the world to do with it. And neither do the folks that don't know Jesus. But we're going to learn some of what to do with that today. Let's go to it. The next hint is what I call biblical groaning. This is one of those things that we normally don't talk about. It's not one of those things that you hear sermons on. There are 2 main passages in biblical groaning. One's in 2 Corinthians 5, the other one's in Romans 8. Let's take a quick look at these. He says, for indeed in this house, in this body, we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven, inasmuch as we, having put it on, will not be found naked. For indeed, while we are in this tent, while we're in this body, we groan, being burdened, because we do not want to be unclothed, but be clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now, he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a pledge. When we become a Christian, the Spirit comes to live in us. We have a taste. We have a taste of what's coming in the future. We have a taste of heaven. Hebrews 10 tells us that when the Spirit comes in, we get a new heart. A new heart with God's Word written on it. And when you and I are in touch with our new hearts, we're going, man, this is great. And we're singing songs, we're praising, and we sense that new heart in the part that connects to Jesus, and we're going, I like it. I like it. And then we go out in the real world, and we're kind of going, some of this I don't like. Or even some of the stuff in my own heart, my own tendency to anger, my own tendency to selfishness. Oh, man, what a deal. Lord, drives me nuts. He says, yeah, me too. Look at Romans 8. For creation was subjected to futility. Strong word, futility. Creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but we ourselves, having the first fruit of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, awaiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. When we biblically groan, we're essentially saying, and that passage goes on where it says the Spirit groans. I think the Spirit groans when he looks and sees the mess in our lives. He goes, oh, Father, help these poor folks. And he does. He helps us. We've got the new heart. We've got the laws written on our heart. We're walking with him, and yet there's still a vestige of the old man that we struggle with. And we feel the pain of that. Similar, when creation was subjected to futility, a lot of times the media and everything thinks if I just had enough education, if we just had enough money, if we just had enough things where we could get along, everything would be fine. I'll tell you what, one of the best lessons for that I ever learned. I was in graduate school. I had my old 65 Chevrolet pickup truck. I had my striping equipment. I was striping a tennis court in North Dallas. This was probably in one of the nicest, swankiest, most expensive neighborhoods you can imagine. The house, big white stucco house, was monstrous. They had a swimming pool that was huge. They had a 3-car disconnected garage as well as the other, Mercedes and BMW and whatever ones I couldn't pronounce. And it was a beautiful morning. It was about 10 o'clock. I just had turned Swindoll off. I'd finished doing the part where I could listen. And then I could hear from the house this man and wife yelling at one another. I kind of going, goodness gracious. All this opulence, with all this stuff, all this money, everything that the world tells us will make us happy. Those people were miserable. And I was going, there's a message there for you, Drew. It was a good message. When we're dealing with folks, when we're chatting with folks that are living in this world, they got groaning going on in their hearts all the time. And when we're honest, we feel that groan too. We live in a broken world. Just ask God what he sees. Just ask the poor families in Florida whose children were just shot. Is there groaning to be done there? Oh, heavens, Lord, have mercy. There is. Feeling those things and seeing those things enable us to relate to somebody else. Let's go to the next verse. There's an interesting verse. This is the third hint in James. This is where James is talking about the tongue. He says, but no one can tame the tongue. It's restless evil and full of deadly poison. How many times have we proved that? With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse man, who has been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing, my brethren. These things ought not to be this way. We could go a whole long way talking about our speech, but there are two things here I want us to pick up on. Number one, he said, with it, we curse men. What does it mean to curse? Now, we're not, when the scriptures use the term curse, they're not talking about an angel, a witch that says, I'm going to turn you into a frog. It's not that kind of curse, okay? When they use the term curse, they're talking about that I'm going to treat you lightly. I'm going to treat you as if you have no substance. I'm going to treat you like an airhead. That he says, I put them on the scales and they were found wanting. They were light. They were nothing to them. When we curse people, we're really treating them as if they had no substance. But it says, why should we not do that? It says, because every man and woman is made in the likeness of God. Now, what in the world does that mean? And again, how does that translate into the way we relate to people? There are two men in my life that made a tremendous difference. One was the Francis Schaeffer. And Francis Schaeffer passed away in '84. But his writings are hard to read. But I consider that Dr. Schaeffer really taught me how to think. And the other guy who had also been touched by Dr. Schaeffer was Larry Crabb. Larry knew how to take some of those and then move it to the heart. Those two guys touched me, and to them, that in Schaeffer's term was looking at the mannishness of man. What separates man from non-man? Let's take a brief, and I want to keep this brief, but it's one of those things that we need to think about, because this is the meat of how we can connect to other people. Let's look at the Genesis passages real quick. Genesis 2, then the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to cultivate it and keep it, to tend and keep. And the Lord commanded the man in that first thing, the tend and keep, we see that he expected man to exercise dominion in that garden. He expected him to work. And when Adam worked there, tending and keeping, it was a joyful thing. It was a fun thing. He had a blast doing it. Work had not yet been spoiled. Then the Lord God commanded the man, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat it, you'll die. Right there we see that God created man with the ability to sense right and wrong. Man has a moral sense that the way God created him, and we can see that by the way God put that in that verse. He expected man to be able to respond to that. It says, then the Lord said, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Literally, according to the opposite of him. So, here was this man in relationship with God, working in the garden, naming all the animals, and he says, I need to make him a helper. It's not good for him to be alone. There's a part of us, when we don't have that mate, we can feel that aloneness. And we're aware of that. Let's go to the next one. This is in Genesis 3. For the Lord God knows that in the day that you eat, oops, now we go. Michael, go back one. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, well, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, the Lord says, you shall not eat or touch it. Now, was that she added and touched too? Is that a problem? I don't know. God said, you shall not eat or touch it, or you'll die. And the servant said to her, you won't die. Next verse. For God knows that in the day that you eat from, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And look at what we learn a lot about God's design through this next phrases. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable for making one wise. I could get that skill in living. The phrase that I've used to explain, if you look at what people are looking for, they look for a cohesive worldview. People try to come up with a view to put their world together. You see this the most in high school and in college kids, and in some middle schoolers, but they're trying to come up with this cohesive worldview. And a lot of us, the problem is we came up with one, and you guys like me with no hair or white hair, you start figuring out, well, some things work, some things don't. You don't fight it as much as you used to, but we still have that sense. But she took from the fruit and ate it, and then she gave to her husband who was with her, who said nothing as he watched this whole thing. And that's another whole story about maleness and femaleness, which we're not going to do. That's another whole semester study, but we'll do that some other time. From these two verses, I think that mannishness of man, that image of God in man, has 7 parts. Now, you can kind of divide them into the dominion parts and the relational parts, or you can see each one has a relational and a dominion part. And I think the male dominion part and the women's dominion part are a little bit different, that is shaded by our maleness and our femaleness. But again, we're not going to go down that road terrible far. But we have that heart. We've seen, this is Heart Awareness Month. So they're on TV, they're all showing the hearts. We know that heart's about, it's about that big in the shape. But we just finished Valentine's Day. Well, there we make a heart look like that. Well, in studying and thinking about this, I came up with what I think a biblical heart looks like. Not the physical one, but the spiritual one. Here's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. And I think this heart, this spot right in here, remember in the 4 spiritual laws, they have a little chair that sits right there? And it says, who's going to be on the throne of your heart? And so when we're talking to people about Jesus, what we're trying to get them to do is put Jesus on the throne of that heart. Now, is it possible for you guys to have invited Jesus into your life and maybe he's not on that throne? Maybe he's in there and kind of rattling around, but you keep trying to stuff other stuff in there. Well, that's what discipleship is. Discipleship is how we learn to bring the Lordship of Christ into all these other areas. Now, why do I think this is important to see it as the heart? How many of you have been through the death of a spouse? How hard was that? Did your heart hurt? Or divorce? Or loss of a kid? Or loss of a job? Or somebody made fun of your artwork? Those kind of losses hit you in the heart. Now, what if you're a strong walking with Jesus believer, does it still hurt? Yes, it still hurts. Would it hurt for a long time? Very possibly. But with Jesus on the throne, where he belongs, you can manage that. And you can live through it in a healthy kind of way. But I think sometimes if we don't have these other areas, go to the next slide. Again, relationship with God with others. Oops, too many, go back. Relationship with God with others. A spouse is not good to be alone. That exercising dominion, that tend and keep, those moral notions, the right and wrong, the good for food, that means that physical pleasure or nourishment. There's something good about that. God, when he made all those trees, he wanted us to enjoy eating them. It's a good thing. Desirable to make one wise. That cohesive life view. How does life work? So let's go to one other verse and then we'll come back. Let's go to another verse. This is the most amazing verse. Isaiah 55, where God the Father looks out to his people and he says, Ho! Hey, y'all! Ho is Hebrew. Hey, y'all. We understand that in the South. Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk and without money and without cost. He's saying, come and get what I have for you. Come fill up this middle section with what I have for you. And then he said, I got a question for you. He said, why do you spend your money for that which is not bread? Why do you spend your wages on that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good and delight yourself in abundance. I mean, how many times have you seen kids take their money and say, oh, I'm really hungry, but I'm going to buy these baseball cards instead. But now I'm still hungry. Wait a minute. We need to spend our money on what's good in food. So what happens is the people that we relate to, often they will take something good, let's say art and music, love playing, love it when they don't get off a half beat. But those things happen. If I took music and put it in here where Jesus belonged, guess what that does to things? That's taking something, we put Molly up there. There's one time for Molly yet, but you can leave Molly, she's pretty. The point of that picture, may as well talk about it, because that's what everybody's looking at. Again, we're talking about what separates man from non-man. What separates mannishness from non-mannishness. I can be sitting at my desk, playing my guitar and practicing. And Molly, she just sleeps in the guitar case. It doesn't, she's a sweet little dog, love my wife's dog, a sweet little dog. But music doesn't move her. Art doesn't move her like it moves us. See, that's kind of that image of God thing. So where do we go with this? What do we do with it? I want to talk about, there may be more, and you can divide things up. I'm going to talk about 3 kinds of conversations that I've seen people have. One kind of a conversation is what I call assaulting people with words. That's where they're just talking to you and telling you, and they're going to keep telling what. Stephen didn't remember this. Some of you were old enough to remember. I remember the Captain Kangaroo show where they took the ping pong balls and dumped them on him. Okay, so you just kind of dumping the truck on somebody. There's no, it is what I call dumping the truck. Sometimes we got a guy that we're going to talk to, and all of a sudden we just go, yap. We just keep talking, and we just dump the whole truck on somebody. Or another one is like drinking out of a fire hose. it's hard to just get a sip out of a fire hose. And sometimes those kind of conversations, they're just sort of one-sided, and they're just all coming. It's all telling. There's a place for that. I mean, we're kind of doing that here. So there's sort of a place for it. And in reality, I love it when there's interaction, when there's back and forth. There's another type of conversation. One time, my sweet wife, Kay Travis, was at chemo, and we were there, and there were a couple of veterans there. And one guy was kind of going, well, I was in Camp Lejeune. I was in Fort Knox. Well, I flew airplanes. Well, I drove tanks. And it went on back and forth for a while. The thing that struck me is it's like having two guys each with a bucket of ping pong balls. And it's like, I got you with one, and then the other guy goes, I got you back. And, and it was, they were sharing information, but it wasn't a conversation. I view a conversation as like playing ping pong. One ball. Back and forth. Back and forth. How do we use that information? Okay, what do we do with this? Three things. Number one, we want to begin to recognize the image of God in other people. We want to listen, what I call it first, listening for heart words. As you're talking with people, if I'm sitting next to somebody on the airplane as I'm flying on a trip, sometimes you're going blah, 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 blah. You just lots of words, and yeah, I'm doing this, we're doing that. And then every once in a while you will hear a heart word. It's like if somebody said, well, I really miss my dad. All of a sudden, heart word, what do you do with that? Do you just say, I ain't touching that? I ain't touching it? Why? Because it could get messy. And anytime we go into the heart, it can get messy. But that's where Jesus needs to be. Jesus is not afraid to go into the middle of messy and then help people come to know Him. When you hear those heart words, what you want to do is to learn to ask a question. It's the next verse in Proverbs. A plan in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. The NIV translates it, the heart of man is deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. It's what I call dropping the bucket. You got the next? Yeah. What we need to, I remember my best friend and his dad were building a house up on top of the mountain, and they dug a well. And it was about an 8 or 10 inch diameter pipe that went down a long way. It was before they had their pump set up. I remember Big Julian, he would lower down this odd bucket. It was a long bucket with a bottom that had kind of a flat valve in it. He'd let it down, and it'd fill up with water, and he'd haul it out. So when we're in that conversation and that person says, I miss my dad, what do you do with that? How do you drop the bucket? How do you ask a question that invites them to move into their heart and share with you some of that? I really like the way he loved me. Yeah, that's good, isn't it? God gave you that dad so that you would know how much he loves you too. See what we did right there? We moved into the heart, and then there's what takes real wisdom, to know when to make that turn to then start talking about Jesus. You make that turn real gently, and it's part of a conversation. It takes wisdom on your part. But we want to learn to drop the bucket. For the next slide. Those pictures were done by a friend of mine named Dave Schimmel, who was a firefighter in Evansville, Indiana. And he was one of my students. And he took a lot of the sayings that I used and turned them into those pictures. Dave did a good job. The idea of that one is that we want to cherish the other person's heart as they're sharing their heart with us. And again, to me, I believe it's not just one-sided. When they share with me, I'm going to share back with them. When they share something, I'm going to share something in kind, but then invite them to say more. I'm going to keep that ping pong game going. I think it's important. A lot of times when I've heard Christians share verses, they tend to say, well, the Bible says, in other words, this stops all conversation. What I would rather us do, what I think is better to do is, well, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. What do you think he meant by that? Keep that ping pong game going. Invite them to say what they think. Well, yeah, I guess he could have meant that, but here's what I think he meant. It's what it means to me. What do you think about that? And you keep that going. You keep that going. How many of us became a Christian all at one time? Just, I think I'll become a Christian. It takes, and I've dealt with some people, if the Apostle Paul was a plus 10, and the worst of the worst is a minus 10, and how do you get from minus 1 to plus 1? That's where you become a Christian. Right there in that scale. Sometimes when we're talking to people, you may be talking to somebody that's a minus 9. They're angry. They hate God. They hate church. And I think there are things where you say, well, everything's better than I don't like too. They're all hypocrites. And see, that goes back to those first hits. We all have stuff in our heart that we wish wasn't there. What do you have in your heart that you wish that weren't there? See, I just twisted it and took it deep for him. And it takes practice. It takes thinking to do this. You're going to need to be smart. There's one book that I think, in the biggest, number one, most difficult question for Christians to answer is, what about pain? The shooting last week. How could a good, loving God allow that? If he was good and loving, he wouldn't have allowed that. How do you answer that? You need to be able to answer that. When you see that, does it make you groan? Makes me groan. I look forward to heaven where that foolishness doesn't happen anymore. You need to have those words. There's a book by Lee Strobel, S-T-R-O-B-E-L. The book is called The Case for Faith. Chapter 3 is his chapter on how to deal with the problem of pain. By far, the best I've ever read in giving an answer for that. I would encourage you to get the book and read it. If you're interested in touching people for Jesus, that one's worth reading. At least that chapter. You don't have to read the whole thing if you don't want to, but I'd read that chapter. Because you're going to have to answer that question. If you traffic in heart stuff. Now I go to the Timothy passage. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome. So we're not trying to generate arguments, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wrong, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance, leading to the knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been held back captive for him to do his will. So when I'm talking to this guy that's a -8 or a -7, or this young gal, I'm going to be praying in my head, Lord, have mercy on that person. Let them come to their senses. And if my conversation just moves them from a -8 to a -6, it's been a wonderful success. Because who knows what God will do with somebody else later on to move them a little further. I've had the great honor and opportunity to move people from -1 to +1, where you get to pray with them and accept Jesus. That's a wonderful thing. And we want to do that. But not everybody's ready for that. And to move them from -8 to -6, or -6 to -4, that they're closer. Because God has a whole bunch of people working and reaching. You want to do your part. You want to live with wisdom. Listen for heart words. Deal with the stuff in your own heart that keeps you from hearing your heart words. Deal with the anger. Deal with the selfishness. Deal with the yucky stuff. Fearlessly look at your own heart and then begin to work on it. Keep Jesus in the middle in the throne and then work on these different areas. That's what discipleship is. It's I bring it all under the authority and leadership of Christ. It's not a quick, easy lesson. It's not one and you're done. But it's a path. It's a path of beginning to hear heart words, seeing how God has made people, and then how to move them toward Him. Learning with wisdom when to make that turn. I've asked questions. I hear heart words. I pursued heart words. And when do I share a little bit of my story? When do I invite some more from them? It takes wisdom, but it's doable. It's doable. And to me, I find that it doesn't feel like a slap in the face. It doesn't feel like that it's out of place. It feels like it's part of a conversation.